Over the years, futuristic cyberpunk stories have grown in number so much that you can easily call them a very cliché subject matter that many of its authors have nothing new to say. The androids have rights narratives and questions regarding humanity and morality, social and individual rights of what are practically pieces of exquisitely crafted wired metal sculptures have been a staple of the genre for a long time, and what we ourselves are but walking meat sacks that have the gift, or maybe the curse, of awareness and cognition. But unfortunately, there's just so much you can achieve if you have nothing more to offer than the typical answers one expects from the well-known tropes and themes of the genre. Despite the story itself being relatively old, it has a strange sense of freshness to it. Pluto doesn't concern itself with android rebellions or grey masking the conflicts, but instead opts to tell its own story with the style that its author, Naoki Urasawa, is all too familiar with. Maybe to the die-hard fans of cyberpunk genre and artificial intelligence, this approach seems rather lazy and uncalled for. Urasawa doesn't spend much time arguing in favor of how and why a quote-unquote walking scrap of metal has human emotions, to the point that even the way these androids and robots function can sometimes get really muddy. After all, if they are robots, that would logically mean that if their artificial intelligence and memory, hard drive, or whatever the hell it is that these robots keep their consciousness in, isn't destroyed, then they can be revived. Right? We can attempt to explain all the functions of the story that Urasawa didn't address or fully develop if we want to, but I think trying to would be missing the point. Whether it's something that can lower the enjoyment of the series for you or not, I think we can all agree that Urasawa's vision for the story doesn't seem to have had hard world building as a high priority, and Pluto itself never pretends that he had either. A mystery is just what the author is known for, and taking the characters and story of a much older manga like Astro Boy and revitalizing them with a lot of personal tweaks of himself, reshaping what once was into an almost entirely new thing, might not seem like the most common way of writing a new story, but the results are nevertheless interesting. It's not often that we get an Urasawa adaptation after all, so let's savor this chance to appreciate and tear it apart while we can. The story of Pluto is centered around a series of murders by a mysterious figure known as Pluto, the Roman god of the underworld. The commonality between all the incidents is one certain war that was waged against the so-called tyrannical regime of Persia. Basically Iran, but with the name other countries called it until almost half a century ago. Almost all the victims have ties to the Bora research group, which was sent to investigate Persia under the suspicions of having weapons of mass destruction, and the consequence of that is almost 7 androids involved in the war and some of their creators being killed in the course of the story. But while the outline screams passionless political bullshit, the story itself anything but passionless. In the course of the story, we as the audience get to see the lives of both the victims and victimizers, and understand how much they are interchangeable until a certain point in time. Despite the short time span given to each member of the cast, the story does a more than adequate job of delving into their motives and personalities. Except the antagonists though. They suck. Which is surprising when you consider that these two series are written by the same guy. From Gege, the de facto protagonist of the series and his struggles with his past, lost memories and trauma, to side characters like Hercules and his sorrow and hatred for the loss of his friend and rival, Epsilon's aversion to violence and conflict, Tenma's attempts at reviving his son, and many more. The characters are mostly kept distinct and memorable enough for you to care about their struggles. And frankly, there is not much wrong with such an approach when it comes to writing characters for a relatively short story. It's practically a miniseries. But while the good characters have enough depth to stand tall as what they are, many of their opposition is given the short end of the stick both in screen time and writing quality. It's not breaking news that Pluto's ending is divisive, messy, garbage. I don't know, pick whichever you want, I guess. Pluto, the character, is a far more interesting, efficient, and well-written character as the mystery murderer than the crying gentle giant, who has a heroic sacrifice duct taped to the ending straight from a second-rate mecha anime kamikaze obsession syndrome. Try saying that 5 times in a row. The mystery of finding out who the so-called Pluto is and what his motivations are is a main driving force of the story. Slowly the layers of his identity are peeled back and we can see past Pluto the myth to reach Pluto the man. But the man turns out to just be a puppet, which doesn't even have a motive of his own for his actions. Copy-pasting the hatred towards the Boro research group and the 7 robots is all he gets at the end, which is sad when I remember that these scenes exist. And especially this one. Making Pluto just the nice victim dude and breaking previously established plot points is off as hell. And that's not all. Remember the supremacist group's leader? If you do, then good, because the story sure as hell forgot about him and his whole cult instantly when this guy's arc ended. And Dr. Roosevelt? Where the hell did this come from? There was enough foreshadowing for the reveal that Trachea was behind everything concerning the war by falsely accusing Persia, but where did the rogue teddy bear villain come from? What's this thing's motivation? What's the connection between it and chest impaled robot guy? While we're at it, what's the connection between the Trachea president and chest impaled robot guy? And why does this character scream rogue AI supremacist who wants to kill all humans villain 101? The ending is barely coherent and plot bits come and go with no rhyme or reason. And we haven't even gotten to the worst villain yet. Abullah, the actual antagonist of the show, has a very great introduction. His identity as a robot is well foreshadowed and in the first 4 to 6 episodes, he's actually a good character. You can understand why he would hate the Boro research group and the robots who participated in the war. The guy not only saw his country being torn apart for a crime it didn't even commit, as a person of high status in the government and the state, but also lost his own family. It might sound a bit generic at first, the villain is a villain because something bad happened to him and stuff, but to me it seems really fitting with the story's themes. And it does the cycle of hatred and violence shit far better than some other series with 4th grade understanding of the subject. Yeah, not a high bar to clear, and sometimes its approach to hatred can be really heavy-handed, like the conclusion of this motherfucking story. The scene with Apollo participating in the funeral of Epsilon's father and talking to Epsilon about his decision to adopt war orphans is really touching. Until they f it up. Okay, $1 million question. What does Apollo do about Epsilon? A. Leaves him alone because he didn't participate in the war and hasn't done anything to warrant revenge. B. Goes for killing him and getting the children killed, basically doing the same thing that happened to himself for no reason. If you chose the first one, congratulations, you're wrong. He goes for the second option. This is where the hatred and violence are bad narrative falls flat on its face and keeps crawling on its belly to the finishing line without standing up. Well, it technically stands up once just to have its head smashed to the ground again, but let's talk about that at the right time. Hatred doesn't work that way. Idiocy does. And I hate it when the writers, in the process of trying to oppose revenge and hatred, just go for strawmanning the Avenger or antagonist by attributing the most brain-dead actions and behaviors to the person in question, instead of actually exploring why hatred and revenge can be bad in of themselves because of inherent properties in themselves. Conflating the two, and then generalizing the shit out of the actions of said character and attributing it to the bigger picture just screams grasping at the straws to make a point. And that's not how you make a point. What the f did Epsilon do to warrant revenge? This plot point is so stupid, I can't even say anything more. It's even worse than the collateral damage cliche because Abalot directly goes after Epsilon for no reason when he easily could have, and should have, just freaking left him alone. I know the story's intention is to say Abalot has been blinded by rage and that he is now losing sight of what was important, but like I said, that's not how it works. People don't go around actively killing innocent bystanders because why not? Especially when they know the subject is innocent and they themselves were the victim of such actions. Talking of innocent, what's this guy's problem with Adam? If it was something like him being hateful towards Adam because of him practically being used as a political pawn after the war to calm the Persians, and him thinking that Adam, as a highly intelligent robot, must have known better than to partake in indirectly excusing the war crimes the other nations committed against Persians, I could have accepted that. But I'm not the author. I don't know if what I just said was intended to be in this story or not, because it sure as hell wasn't ever mentioned, and I'm not supposed to do the author's job for him and fill in everything he left empty or didn't include in the story. And the conclusion of Abalot's story, not counting the reveal about him being Goji because that made sense and was extremely well foreshadowed and fitting, is in the same level as Bora's design. So let's talk about Bora. Okay, so ultimately, for whatever reason, it turns out that the big bad was planning on destroying the world. When did a murder mystery about emotions like hatred, love, grief, understanding the antagonist's motivations, and coming to better understand the conflict evolve into a let's go save the world from a kaiju monster shooting Godzilla beams? And can we talk about why Bora looks like shit? And I don't mean it metaphorically or poetically or rhetorically or any other fancy way. He looks like shit. Straight up. And no, the Astro Boy Bora didn't look like shit, it just looked bland. In the story, Bora is mentioned and hyped up as a very formidable and terrifying monster. And then we get this. So, granted, the story fumbles a lot when it comes to these villains, and the second half of the last episode seems like an almost different show, breaking previously established plot points at the drop of a hat, like how the whole reason Pluto killed Epsilon was because he didn't have control over himself, but now he suddenly does. But despite all of that, there's a lot of genuine care and emotion put into this story. I've already said this before, but most of what comes from the good characters cast is really phenomenal. And for me, the saving grace of this story is in seeing how these people try to live their lives after a tragedy, with each one taking different lessons from the story's events. There is a great sequence before the final hit into the mud that the story does, finally getting the answer to Gadget's many flashbacks and vague memories. And the way the story sets up the eventual climax of his story, as Urasawa does best, is fantastic. The times he sees abandoned broken robots in trash piles, or the reason for him vaporizing someone, are more than just one-off events and disjointed scenes trying to explore a character in a very disconnected way. The innocence of Uran and Adam, and seeing how they react to the horrific reality of their world is heartbreaking, and yet heartwarming as well. Some might find it too cliché that the characters keep steady in their path and remain in their safe zone, never really straying from the path of priority they took, but we see enough of those who've gone to various extremes in their path in life. While Oshinamizu is trying to fix a broken puppy, Tenma is grieving for his son in more ways than just visiting his grave. He creates the final antagonist of the show, and even in his dialogues, we can hear how much of what he has done cannot really be considered good, but just desperate actions from a broken man. And if you were surprised that I didn't mention the blind pianist and Note 02, their struggles with their past and what each tries to gain from music is beautiful. Insert the pianist's name here, is a retired and old musician who has now faded from the public's mind, to the point that even the small offers he gets are that of licenses for his work, not commission for a new piece. It's unfortunate where your entire legacy becomes just history, a thing of the past, something with little demand for, especially a form of expression and art you spent all the remaining seeing moments of your life trying to hone to perfection. There's a great deal of tragedy in Pluto, and a lot of beauty. There's much to praise in this work, a lot more to talk about. From the loss of a brother, to loss of a rival, to the loss of a father or son or everything. One thing I appreciate a lot is how Pluto chose to portray Iran, aka Persia. It's not the most authentic or accurate representation. For example, a lot of the name spellings are off, and the skin tone and clothing choices approach the level of public perception of Iran more than its actual aesthetic. But it's respectful. Surely a lot more than what we get from other media. Isn't that right, Mr. Snyder and Miller? Darius is also quite a well-done character throughout the show, despite us not getting too much screen time for him. But what we do get of him is well thought out and well written enough to not approach caricaturization and depicting the dictator as some megalomaniacal jackass so far removed from humanity you'd very well be justified to call him a Satan figure. And for me, this scene in particular really hit hard.
いねえよ。ここにはテロリストなんかいねえよ。ここにいたのは子供だ。
I have heard the story being interpreted as an allegory for the Iraq War, and while I don't know how much of that was the intention and why Urasawa chose Iran instead of Iraq if that's the case, it's not like it's too far removed from the supposed intention, so I'm okay with it. Many people over the years have described Urasawa's works as many things. Some find his works pretentious and boring, while others might consider them thought-provoking, deep, and well thought out. I can appreciate his honest style of writing, attention to subject matter, and writing skills. And at the end of the day, despite all my problems with his newest work to get an adaptation, I still, overall, like what he did with Pluto, and quite enjoyed the experience of watching the show. Also, I just found out maybe telling people to like and subscribe might have an effect.